I also got into the habit of, after meditation, smiling and taking that smile out into the world with me. It's a way of taking the peace of meditation out into the world. Okay, for this evening's talk, again, don't know what I'm going to talk about, but what came up at the beginning of the meditation is I wanted to indulge myself this evening. I'm going to talk about the subject which I like most of all, which is meditation itself. Buddhist meditation and its place in the scheme of things. I know that this weekend there are peace marches on, and sometimes you wonder, do people really understand what peace is? Do people understand what freedom is? The United States sometimes calls itself the free world, but then there's over, I think, 2 million prisoners in the United States. What is freedom? We're all searching for happiness in this world, but what is happiness? When we come to all the religions in the world, we may all go up on our soapboxes and pronounce what we think is right and what we think is wrong, and which is the best religion, which is the worst religion, and so on. But that really doesn't really cut much ice, as they say. It doesn't really mean very much. Just empty words. What is more important is we teach people just how to find out for themselves, especially the big questions of life. About who are you? Is there such a thing as a God or not? Is there rebirth? Is there karma? What's the purpose of life? All of those big questions which are spiritual, which are meaningful, which are actually the guidelines for one's existence, for one's life, are so important that really we can't just trust what a monk or a priest or a pope or whoever says. We have to find some way of finding these things out for ourselves. And this is the main purpose of Buddhist meditation. As many of you would know, that Buddhist meditation is and has been from the very beginning the central part of the Buddha's teachings, simply because the Buddha became the Buddha by meditating under a wisdom tree, a Bodhi tree. And so meditation is quintessentially Buddhist. But for these days when meditation becomes quite popular, quite faddish, for much of what we call meditation in our Western world, it's relaxation. And there's something much deeper in Buddhist meditation. Relaxation is fine. Relaxation means that you have a greater chance of coping with the difficulties, with the stresses, with the disappointments, with the problems of life. But I think we should all know there's something much more to meditation than that. And indeed, the way of Buddhist meditation goes to the very heart of things. On the way, it sort of brings up tremendous peace, tremendous sense of contentment, great relaxation, and a sense of ease in one's life. But it moves much deeper into states which are beyond this world, literally, and also states which give you insights, understandings into the answers to the big questions. So the way of meditation is actually teaching people to find out for themselves, giving people a means, a route to learn. I know that many teachers working in schools and universities tell me that their main job is not to impart information, but to impart the way to find out information, to give them skills to inquire and find out the truth for themselves. And that's why that many people find the internet just so fascinating, because there's all this information out there. In Buddhism, really, instead of the internet, the inside net of the mind, where you actually find out heaps and heaps of other information by clicking on into meditation and by finding all those truths, not in the World Wide Web, but in your inside sort of net of truth. And this is what meditation is all about, of finding those ways inside and finding out exactly what's going on. When a person sits down to meditate, what they're actually doing, they're letting go of distractions in the world. Distractions in the world are just ways of trying to seek happiness outside of yourself, outside of this moment. It's always this search for truth somewhere else. In the same way we think that somebody else is the owner of truth, so you come and ask questions from a monk or from a guru or from some expert. And we have a culture now of having experts. And we think that the people who know all the truths are in universities or they're consultants. There's no consultancy in Buddhism. You are the consultant. You are the expert. So instead of trying to ask questions of somebody else in Buddhism, our whole idea, the purpose of Buddhism, is to act as a mirror and encouragement to find out those answers for oneself. However, many people are lazy in this world. They want to find out the truth from somebody else. Just go and ask a wise person, an expert, a consultant, and they know the truth. And of course that has caused, or will cause, so many difficulties and problems in this world. If they do know the truth, do you understand what they're saying? So which is why, especially in Buddhism of most religions, always telling you, encouraging, to find out that truth for oneself. That every human being, no matter what race, no matter what gender, no matter what age, able, disabled or whatever, because everybody has a mind, and in that mind is the truth, everybody has the opportunity to find out that truth for themselves. Everybody has the opportunity for enlightenment. Not just men, women, not just Asians, Australians, not just university professors, bricklayers, whoever you are, one can find out that truth for oneself. And meditation is the way to find out that truth. Now what meditation is doing is going to the source of things, going into the center. Some years ago I gave a simile of the times when I used to go to cinemas in London as a young man. In those days that people would smoke in those cinemas, and I was very happy that they smoked, otherwise this simile would never have occurred. When you'd look at the movie on the screen, but every now and again, especially when it started getting a little bit boring, you would notice that that screen in front of you had a cone of light receding from it. And instead of looking at the screen, sometimes you'd look at that cone of light. Because the smoky air, some of the light was reflected off the smoke particles and formed this very visible cone of light. And you go back to that source of that cone of light. You go to its focus, its origin. The visible cone would actually show where everything was coming from. And then you'd see in the back of the cinema, in a little box high up, there was a bloke, usually, with a machine and just a little celluloid going through a bright light. That was all it was. You went to the source of things, the origin of things, and you saw that what you thought was people killing themselves on the screen, what you thought were romantic interludes, what you thought was some frightening monster about to eat up somebody, was just the play of light on the screen. It was a wonderful example of what we mean as delusion, and how we can buy into much of we take to be real, and we can suffer as a result because we don't understand the source of all of this. It reminds me of a simile I haven't told for a while, of a friend of mine who, when he was young, went to the island of Jamaica. In the island of Jamaica, he went to a remote part, a very rough part. It was a very violent island. It still is. Have a high crime rate there. And he went to this particular part of Jamaica where they still had drive-in movie theatres. And in this particular movie theatre, instead of having a usual cloth screen, had a concrete screen. This huge reinforced block of concrete, some 1 or 2 feet thick. And he had to ask the people, why on earth, of all of the drive-in movie theatres they'd ever seen in the world, why had this place got a concrete screen instead of a cloth screen? And the answer was this particular town used to like cowboy and Indians, Western movies. And whenever there was, as there always is in Westerns, a gunfight, whenever the cowboys were shooting the Indians or the sheriff was shooting up somebody, whenever there's a gunfight, the people in the audience would also get their guns out and join in. So if they didn't like the sheriff, they'd shoot at the sheriff. If they didn't like the cowboy, they'd shoot at the cowboy. And the poor owner of this cinema had gone through so many cloth screens in the many years he owned the cinema. Eventually, and here comes a terrible pun, he decided to bite the bullet and actually get a concrete screen so that members of the audience could just go for their life and they could shoot whoever they wanted to. This might give an idea for entrepreneurs in Perth to have a theme movie cinema where people can be given guns and they can shoot whoever they want. I'm sure some people in our community would quite like that. But anyhow, in this particular movie, you could see that people were getting involved in the characters because they couldn't see the source of things as they truly are. In the same way, in our life, in the movie of our life, how often do we get involved in the characters, in the dramas of life, not realizing what the source truly is? So, I use that simile because it's a simile which was used by, not a simile, but it describes something which was said by the Buddha, of the way to wisdom is seeing things as they truly are, in particular the word yonisa manasikara, the work of the mind which goes back to the source, the origin of things. That's Buddhist wisdom. So you want to find the origin, the source of things. Now you can imagine just that cone of light ever going into a center, a confined area. This is defining the path of what we call Buddhist meditation. We go in to the present moment. We go in to silence. We go into the breath. We go into the mind. We go into these deep states of bliss to find out the source of things. Always going in and in and in. If you look upon the way that our mind works, our mind very rarely goes into things. Instead, it goes on to the next thing. Always on the move. Always going on to the next event, the next distraction, or sometimes going back into the past, but never really going into the middle of things, into the center. Even going into the center of yourself is sometimes very difficult because many people are afraid of themselves. Many people are afraid of the moment. They're afraid of silence. As I've watched people meditate over the years, I've watched people get involved in spirituality. Again, there's a lot of fear comes up because it's the fear of finding out the truth, which may not be what you expect or maybe not what you want. It's very easy for any teacher or guru or priest or whatever to come up here and tell people what they want to hear. However, that's not being honest. Instead of telling people what they want to hear, have to tell people how they can find out what is true, whether they need it or not, whether they want it or not. And this is the way, again, of Buddhist meditation, going into the middle, going into the center of things. So this is where we start by going into the center of time. Even going into the center of time, into this beautiful place called now, is a strange experience for many people. Because when you get into the very center of now, when there's no past and there's no future for you, first of all, many problems and difficulties disappear. How much of the suffering and burdens of life are concerned with what's happened in the past or what's going to happen next? Fear. If we really look, just with our wisdom, with our own sense, with just how past and future tortures us, how heavy they are, then we can realize how much freedom from problems and suffering can be found without going anywhere, buying anything, by just being in the moment for a short while. Sometimes people look at their past and look for reasons in the past for what's happening now. They look for problems of abuse in the past, mistakes of somebody else or themselves in the past, guilt and victim psychology. So often in Buddhism we say that that's mostly a waste of time. That the best way of dealing with what's happened in the past is to drop it, to leave it alone. To acknowledge, forgive and let go, the famous AFL code. When we can do this, you find there's a great sense of freedom. Very often we pick up the past, maybe some very painful, unfortunate, unpleasant things which happened in the past, and very often we magnify those. Too often the past is so far gone, we cannot be absolutely sure what happened. You can't be absolutely sure what happened even half an hour ago. There's an old meditation trick, rather a question which is done by meditation teachers, which asks the people, you've come into this building now, you've taken off your shoes. Do you remember exactly where you left your shoes? Which direction they were pointing? Very often, even something simple like leaving your shoes, where you left them, you can't remember properly. Sometimes even people can't remember where they parked their car. It's happened quite a few times here that somebody's come afterwards, my car's been stolen, my car's been stolen. And we go out and have a look, they just forgot where they parked the blooming thing. That's all. It's very embarrassing. But nevertheless, it just shows you just how our memory is unreliable. Understanding the unreliable nature of our memory, how can we judge ourselves or judge someone else, think we're a victim or even have guilt? How do you know what you did or why you did it, when sometimes it was such a long time ago? So this is why in Buddhist psychology you say you can acknowledge what you think is the past, but don't trust that your image of the past is accurate to what actually happened. In fact, it's so uncertain what actually happened. It's far more wise to completely let it go. When you let go of the past, you are free from the past. And isn't that what you want? That freedom from the guilt, from the pain, from the disappointment, whatever happened. And that is possible at any moment for a human being, when they have the courage just to let go. The same, the freedom from fear. How fearful is our community? Fearful of war, fearful of sickness, fearful of our relationships being broken. So much fear happens. And of course all of that is of the future. Imagine just being in the present moment. In the present moment there cannot be fear, there cannot be guilt, there cannot be idea of being a victim. Which is why that in that first stage of meditation, when people do become present, they feel this lightness, this freedom. It's also we have the freedom from the burden of time. We feel oppressed by time in our society, never having enough time to do all of these things we think we should be doing, to go to all these places we should be going, to complete all our tasks. In the present moment you find there is all the freedom you have in the world. It's a strange thing that when you come to this very small area of time we call now, it looks as if there's no space there at all. But to come into the present moment you feel this huge amount of time. You have all the time in the world when you're now. That's how it feels. A couple of weeks ago I was talking about measuring. This is what is happening. When you become one-pointed in time, which is what present moment awareness is all about, one-pointed in time, going to the focus, the source of time, like that cone from the movie theatre, you find in that point of time you have all the time in the world. because you are free from measuring time. In a point you can't measure. All measurements are from the past to the present, future to the present, or future to past. There's no measurement there possible. That's why you feel free. So just that amount of meditation, of being in the present moment, is pregnant with so many insights into the nature of time itself, and how you make time, or rather what you conceive of time, by planning, expecting, going into the past, remembering. You make time. It's not time makes you. Time is made by desire, by craving. When you give up that craving and that desire, you come into the present moment. Time takes on a completely different meaning. The timeless present. You're focusing in and you're getting a completely different paradigm, what I was talking last week. A completely different worldview. A completely different way of looking at this essential part of life called time. Have you got enough time? You have all the time in the world when you get into the present moment, but you've got no time at all when you're off in the future or lingering in the past. Literally, you're not here. If you go even deeper, focusing in, as I was saying during the meditation period, into silence, which is in the center of now, there's no time to speak, there's no time to say anything, there's no time to measure, nor to judge. All these judgments about yourself and others, about life, they all stop there in the silence. My goodness, why does people speak so much? And I'm not talking with their mouths. Why do people speak so much inside their heads? Always thinking, never being quiet. In a moment of silence, just one realizes just how noisy is our hearts. Never being quiet for a moment for most people. Never knowing the freedom from that inner speech. After a while, that inner speech can stop you sleeping at night. Think, worry, worry, worry. In a while, it can actually just send you crazy. And sometimes one can go to places in the world which are just so silent, deep in the bush, in the middle of the ocean, places of absolute quiet. And it reminds you of something sacred, which is the silence in your heart. There is something very spiritual about silent places, which is why indigenous communities, and even European, Asian, whatever communities, there's something about silence which resonates with truth, as there is the resonating of truth in the silence of your own hearts. When all of the words stop, when there's peace, when there's quiet inside, when the complaining ends. There's an old story of one of the monks in Ajahn Brahm's monastery. He was only a novice monk. And this particular novice monk was listening to a talk by Ajahn Brahm one evening. And the talk was droning on and on and on and on. And on and on and on and on. Sometimes Ajahn Brahm could talk for hours. Whenever you pick up a book by this famous teacher which has been translated into English, please know that that's been edited, heavily edited. All those hours and hours of talk, just a few jewels which have been remaining from those talks have been sifted like diamonds from the gravel. And that's what we have in the book. But to listen to him at the time, sometimes as many, many hours. You had to wait for just one little jewel to come out. And this is what was happening that evening. The little novice, as you know, in Asian countries, in Sri Lanka, in Thailand, Burma, Laos, sometimes little boys get ordained as novices, maybe because they have no parents, or because their parents are destitute, and the monastery looks after them and gives them a livelihood. But once this little boy was listening to this talk, and he was getting so bored and fed up. And as a novice, he couldn't walk out of the door. He had to sit there and listen. And he got so mad at Ajahn Chah, he kept on thinking, when is this monk going to stop? When is he going to stop? When is he going to stop? And you know how obsessive the mind can become, like getting into a rut which you can't get out of. When is he going to stop? When is he going to stop? When is he going to stop? And after an hour or so of thinking this in his mind changed. Slightly, but so dramatically. Instead of when is Ajahn Chah, this great teacher, when is Ajahn Chah going to stop? His mind turned and said, when am I going to stop? And he stopped. His mind stopped. He went into silence. And when he opened his eyes again afterwards, though all the monks had long gone, he'd been sitting in deep meditation, he didn't know for how many hours. His mind had stopped. He got into silence, into timelessness, for a long period of time. A happy little novice. This is what we mean by that silence. When that inside stops and it gets quiet, you'll find that when that mind stops, all this thinking, all the judging, all the fault finding, all the measuring, all the knowing. We think we know. We think we understand. Because we believe in that inner monologue. This is where you find a deep truth. You're not buying into that inner soundtrack. You're stopping it and becoming quiet and silent. In silence is where one finds wisdom, not in the words. There's too many people who think too much, who gather evidence and come to stupid conclusions. If only half the world would be quiet, would stop thinking, instead listen. Instead of talking back to the world, to listen to the world, to listen to themselves, to suspend all of this inner monologue so they can listen for a change. It's like giving a talk. As was reported in Time magazine a few years ago, they did a survey of people giving lectures in the audience, and they found out that on average, while a person was giving a lecture, that 95% of the audience were thinking sexual fantasies. I do hope that's not the case here. Isn't it hard for people just to be silent while they're listening to the world? If you can't be silent, how can you listen to your partner in life? How can you fully understand them? How can you even understand yourself when you're always talking back to life? In silence, there's not only the freedom from this judging, there's almost like a suspension of this judging and giving things names. There's a silence in that heart. In the silent mind, one gets a huge amount of peace. When we talk about peace in our world, there cannot be peace in the world when there's not peace in people's hearts. And peace in people's hearts comes from the silence of the heart. When the mind doesn't need to move into speaking, into thinking, into judging. That training of just giving silence to people, that creates so much peace and harmony in their body, in their mind, in their family, in their office, in their community, in the world. One of the biggest causes of conflicts, whether it's huge conflicts between nations or conflicts in a family, is people thinking too much.